Hello there and welcome back to my YouTube channel. James here as ever for another really helpful ACCA video talking about today how to pass your upcoming advanced taxation, that's the P6 or the ATX exam. My name is James, I'm an ACCA qualified member from the UK, and if this is the first time you've joined and clicked onto this video, you can see that I failed the advanced taxation exam with a lovely 43, but came back to actually get 64, and I've given you a nice screenshot at the bottom here from my ACCA account of the hours and the days of revision going through this exam. But today's video, I'm going to take you through my 5 top tips that I would recommend for you to undertake so that you can pass your upcoming advanced taxation examination. Now, if you are new to visiting my channel, and this is the first time you've seen any of my videos, my channel is 100% student-led to help ACCA students out around the world with any queries they have. So leave a comment below because I dedicate every video to one of my subscribers, and today is no different. So Nicole, I'm sure you're out there, I'm sure you're watching this video, currently studying advanced taxation with SBL and advanced audit and assurance. I've got videos on them on my channel, so check them out after this one. But today's video is dedicated to you, Nicole, along with, I have to give a shout out to the lovely Shayla as well, who's been in touch on my Instagram, and we're going to work through so that we can actually help you pass as well, Shayla. We've got this. Trust me, if you follow these 5 tips that I'm going to walk and talk you through, you are going to be absolutely sorted and you're going to be getting over 64. I've got no doubt in it. Now, the reason why this video is so critical, I get loads of messages on my Instagram about it, and the other key thing is the pass rate's about 35 to 40%, so a really tough exam. There are lots of different variations of the advanced taxation exam, so this video is going to cover tips that you can apply if you're doing the Cyprus, Hong Kong, Ireland, Malaysia, Malta, Singapore, South Africa, and finally the one I sat, which was for the UK. So I'm going to run you through the 5 key tips. There's going to be lots of different free resources that I would highly recommend you actually go and check out. All the links are going to be in the description below, with all of the recommended texts, examination preparations and pocket notes that I'll refer to in this video. So make sure you hang around all the way to the end. You're going to have a pen and paper ready because there's a lot of notes to take down and they're all going to help you out. If you follow it through, get the right texts that are for the right dates as well, you're going to be absolutely sorted and you're going to be 50 plus and above. And let me know in the comments if you get over 64. It really makes my day hearing from students around the world, and also it shows that the actual tips help. That's the main thing. So without any further ado, let's get started. Pen and paper at the ready now, because tip number 1, the first one here, is break down the topic areas. Now this is really fundamental for any advanced taxation student, because you'll know from picking up the books or when you go through them, they are massive. There is a lot of context on there, so I worked this out when I failed it for the first time. I went, oh my gosh, I'm not quite sure which they sort of relate to. Well, there is a nice free resource on ACCA's website that breaks it down into 4 really key areas. So the first one to get down is knowledge and understanding of the tax system. The second one is the impact, action and interaction of taxes on various situations. So that's applying it to the scenario, key exam technique we're going to come on to later. Number 3, standard tax planning. That's all about minimizing and deferring the actual tax liabilities. So that's really key, especially for this module. And then 4th, and this is absolutely fundamental, especially if you're going to go work in the tax sector, clients, HMRC, so Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs from the UK, and other professionals, how you communicate with them. This is also a really good time to say that if this is potentially one of your modules that you're thinking about doing, from my experience of going to CPD events and real life sort of scenarios, the advanced taxation exam, from failing it and doing it again and applying what I've learned to help myself, our clients around the world, it is one of the best options for me to take, because I've been to CPD events where people have not done tax and they go, oh my word, I've really got to knuckle down, and they end up doing tax anyway. So I'd highly recommend it for you to pick it as one of your options. It's tough, but trust me, it is worth it. So if you're actually going to be doing the advanced taxation examination, and maybe you've got a bit of time beforehand, make sure you've read all of your sort of up-to-date bits on here to say, well, as I've mentioned from those first 4 key points on there, the key study guide is where they're all found. And with my editing skills up here now, I'm going to point up here because there's a nice happy lady who, I'm not sure if she has done advanced taxation with that smile, but that's the smile you're going to have when you pass it. The link is actually in the description below, so you can access the up-to-date study guide. So whatever year you are watching this video in, it is going to take you to exactly where to find that key resource. I'll make sure it's all up to date. The first thing you've got to get down for here is, along with that actual study guide that they do mention in there, but it is a big step up from the original sort of F6 and sort of just normal tax paper from the foundation levels. So if you have got time, you've got a few months before you're actually going to sit this exam, before you're going to get stuck into those real core texts, make sure you go back, have a read through all of your keynotes. I wish I'd have done that sooner as well, because that is the core foundation knowledge that if you just have a bit of a refresher, go through your old notes, it'll help you out with your knowledge to actually apply it when you get stuck into the main core text. Because advanced taxation is, well, it has a lot more technical aspects, a lot of detail, and you have to be so specific in your answers. Otherwise, the examiner is not going to give you the marks. There's a lot of information to digest, and it's, as I said, a lot more technical than the sort of F paper, F6, and the original tax paper, because the expectation goes up a lot more. There's lots of narrative explaining what you're doing, and you just can't get away with calculations. So being specific, we'll come on to it, applying it to the scenario, but make sure you get jotted down. Key note here, you can't just rely upon calculations. So before the advanced taxation exam, one other thing, you've got to do this beforehand. The stats from ACCA, they even mention it on their website. Complete your ethics and professional skills module. You can do that online on your My ACCA. If you've got any questions on this, put it in the comments below. I'm more than happy to help. But the stats show us that students who actually complete that ethics and professional skills module do better on this exam. So you've been warned. I would also recommend to just do it as early as possible. So if you are in contact with other students who are maybe doing their foundation papers, their applied skills, get them to do it as soon as possible. It's only going to benefit. Don't leave it to the last minute, shall I say, when you've completed all the exams. It's to benefit you when you're doing them. The next key thing to get jotted down as well is when you're actually planning on sitting the advanced taxation examination, because I get loads of queries. That's why I put the links for all the correct books at the bottom. The rules and regulations and rates all change. So within the UK paper, and obviously you're going to have to check for the one that you're doing, March is the last sitting for the final amounts of rates that are going to be applied or rules for that particular period. So for the new rules, so you've got 4 attempts at it. You've got, well, June, September, December and March. So if you're sitting it in March of your final one, then you've got one attempt at one set of rules, then you have to learn a new set of rules or apply different figures for the June paper. So make sure you've got the right up-to-date core text, and then it links into that study guide as we talked about above, that they update it year on year. I'll do another video on it as well, so check it out on the channel, and that'll definitely help you. I've put, as I said, all the up-to-date books and resources. Make sure you have the right one. That is going to be so fundamental, because the update on these sort of key rates, new legislation, how we actually prepare the treatments, it's all down there. Just click the links, check them out, and that'll help you to make sure you've got the right one. Otherwise, imagine going into the exam, you've revised, you've spent all that time, but you've actually looked at the wrong rates and standards. So please, 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 I've heard it before, and I don't want you to fall for that mistake. So that is tip number 1 sorted. You've got now that free resource to go through it. So tip number 2, and you won't hear this, or you won't probably see this on ACCA's website, but that is make advanced taxation mistakes. Super tip now, this is. First things first, the advanced taxation module is so wide. There are so many topics. So the first tip to get down is that I would highly recommend that you get separate folders for the different areas. I'm going to run them through for you in a moment, and with my key editing, I'll put a nice little breakdown on the side here so we can get it jotted down. But the other thing on here is, yes, have separate folders for them, but for anyone who's tuned into my channel before, you know we run on a lovely zero budget on here. And one of the key things, again, which you probably won't hear online, is what I like to call the mistake sheet. So for every folder and every topic we're going to talk about, you need to do this for your upcoming advanced taxation exam. Just simply get a piece of paper and write on the top income tax, or write on the top new sheet capital gains tax, new sheet inheritance tax. And the rule of this mistake sheet is when you've gone through an actual income tax question, capital gains question, and you didn't get something right in that question, pop it on the sheet, pop it on the sheet, pop it on the sheet. Clear and concise, little bullet points, and that is going to be so critical, especially on the exam day. You're going to have massive learning curves, and you're going to probably have about, well, I've got down here 7 topics that I would have for it. But trust me, once you have it with your notes as you go through, you start to notice all of the key facts, key figures as you're going through, and pick up on those mistakes. Your learning curve from it, and you're going to improve so much. And obviously, very technical on here. Let me put that back down there. But the next key thing is, well, what are those 7 key areas? And you can have this for mistake sheets for as many as you'd like. Well, the first one on here, I've got down on my notes as I'm going through it for you. First one I've definitely got down is income tax, and James, in the edit, put the list up here for the lovely viewers as well. And on there, usually key things that come up on here for you to jot down: liabilities, sort of overseas aspects, trusts, exemptions, reliefs, and closely related parties is another thing the external examiner really likes. So for number 2 on your mistake sheet, capital gains tax. Whoa, massive core area, chargeable gains, losses, liabilities, again relating to overseas aspects, and also when the payments are due. So dates are on there for other aspects. Also links into trusts, exemptions, other reliefs, and other closely related parties is another fundamental area. Number three now, inheritance tax. So this is everything from calculating the liabilities, valuations of what actually goes into the inheritance tax calculation, what reliefs have we got, any transfers over, trusts, overseas aspects, and any other sort of administration things. So whether that's to do with charitable donations, when it's due to be paid, any changes in it. There are lots and lots of little details and specifics you're going to put onto your actual sheets on there. Fourth one I've got down is corporation tax. So again, liabilities. Have we got any overseas subsidiaries or branches on there? Groups is another key thing which we're going to come on to later. So whether that's to do with, again, losses and loss relief, exemptions, other forms of relief, and special company types. So more topics for you to be getting jotted down now. Don't worry, I'll slow down for you, it's okay. And next one, stamp taxes. So this is going to be a bit different depending on which sort of examination you're doing, but usually it relates to property on there, maybe a touch on shares, all about the actual liabilities due and the thresholds especially. Get that jotted down. These are things that I wrote down in my notes. I went, yeah, definitely had little notes on there that I really sort of struggled on. And then number 5, value-added tax. So goods and services being imported or exported overseas, depending on sort of which jurisdiction you're going to. And then you've got to link it into the sort of tax administration part of this and the tax systems. So do we actually have a liability due? Do we have to declare it? What are the types of goods? These are other little jinky questions, especially for VAT. They're usually about 4 to 5 marks, but that can be the difference between you getting over that 50 plus. The other key one on here, which sometimes goes a bit under the radar, but the external examiner absolutely loves to test it. Check out the external examiner's reports. It's all in the description below. I'll put the links down there. But residency and domiciled. What status are you actually referring to for the potential client or the individual that the scenario is relating to? We're going to come on to that in a bit more detail later on, but you're definitely going to need a sheet for that. And number 7 on there for very technicalness, I would say here. Number 7, any other mistakes. So what else has come up on the papers, because there are going to be topics, the syllabus is so wide, just to get jotted down. And once you've got it all collated together, that is going to help you so much as you go through it. The other key thing on here, I always get these questions from students who drop me a message or leave me a comment saying, when should I actually start going through past paper questions for advanced taxation? Should I just go through the core text like I've done in the past, then go on to the past paper questions? Well, I would advocate to actually start going through the past paper questions as soon as possible, or as soon as you actually feel comfortable, should I say. Because that is where you start to see the different techniques externals going to test you on, the level of detail and the specifics that you need to go into. This is where the pocket notes that I would highly recommend condenses it all down. The link is in the bottom. It's a really good reflective little log where it takes that massive book and pulls it down into about a little flick book as it is on there. Saved me absolutely loads of time. So that is tip number 2 on there. Now, moving on swiftly, and I'm sure you've been writing away, but I've got a lot to tell you today. It was a big part of my life, 6 months. But tip number 3 on here, the advanced taxation exam strategy. That's tip number 3 for you, because this is such a time-pressured examination. First of all, we've got to get down, or you've got to get down in your notes, that you have 180 minutes, 3 hours, plus give or take your 15 minutes reading time, but we're going to leave that in reserve, and you've got 100 marks to actually achieve. Obviously, I'm expecting 99s and 100s from people who watch this video. So what that equates to is 180 minutes divided by 100 marks, so 1.8 minutes per mark. I think the key thing to get down here is you've got to be strict with yourself when to move on. Students who fail this examination spend far too long, especially on section A, where it's the 35 marker or the 25 marker question, and they just don't leave enough time for the 220 markers. Because the exam is split up into section A, which is 60 marks, as I said, the 35 marker and the 25, and then section B we have 40 marks, that's 220 markers. And the split on that for the 1.8 minutes, so the 35 marks, get this jotted down, equates to about 63 minutes, 25 marks on there at 1.8 minutes per mark, that's 45 minutes on there, so 25 marks, 45 minutes. And then finally for the 20 mark questions at the end, so you've got 2 of these, that equates to about 36 minutes per question. Okay? Now, this is the real fundamental bit, that when I first failed this exam, I actually just went straight into it. I thought, let's get section A out of the way. First of all, 35 marker, 25, then the 220s. And I failed it. But my next attempt at it, I went, hang on, I remember going through it, and the 20 markers were sort of nicely more sort of broken down on there. So I thought, we'll attempt section B first of all, then go back onto section A. Because I found it was a lot easier for section B with the 220 markers. The questions were more sort of broken down. I actually found that I actually got a bit of momentum in the examination, that I went, I've done 220 mark questions, I've had a really good go on them. I can keep it to time a lot sort of easier, so 220 markers, 35 minutes each. So I know that when I see about 1 hour and 10 on the clock, straight away, that was I've got to change over, got to go over to section A. So 1 hour and 10, start with section B first of all, and then move on to section A after that. Build some momentum, get those marks in the bank first of all, then go on to the slightly more trickier ones in section A. So attempt that, as I said, the smaller requirements. And this is another technique which I read online, which I thought, oh my word, why did I not think about this? That when you go on to section A, when you're going into the exam, you're 1 hour and 10 in, you've done section B, then you're coming on to section A and you think, right, I'm going on to the 25 marker now. And the 25 marker is actually usually broken down by a sort of 16 marks for part A, then maybe it's 5 for part B, and then 4 for part C on there. So what you need to do, because they're all really separated out, they all relate to the requirement, but what I found was, if I did the 4 marker first, then the 5 marker, then the 16 marker, I actually got better results on there because I was able to break it down, I could be more specific. So a classic 4 marker, as I mentioned above, maybe sort of VAT, and then the 5 marker I could focus on, say, ethics, and then the 16 marker was maybe on inheritance tax. Get those easy marks in the bank first of all. So many students fall into the trap on this examination like I did, where you just think, oh, I'm going to do the 16 marker, there's more marks there to get. Well, get that jotted down. I go for the easy marks first, then we attack the big marks afterwards. Get those easy marks in the bank first of all, build that momentum in the question, and you're going to hit the ground running and pick up on more and more marks as a result. It's going to come with more practice as you go through it, but give it a try. Give it a try. Let me know in the comments how it goes. And what I'll do for you as well, and with my editing skills up here, I'm going to point for you. I'm going to put the link in the description for this video below of where you can find all of the free past papers online on ACCA's website for whichever examination you're doing, and the most up-to-date as well. So go and check it out. It's only going to help take this tactic, apply it, give yourself that sort of, I'm going to sit there, James, I'm going to go through it, do it first thing in the morning when you've got actually more sort of energy, because this is where your presentation links into it, that the external examiner always goes on about students who have poor presentation, and we'll come on to pro formas as we go on below. They tend to do and get the best marks. The external examiner comments on this in their report every single year, that there is a correlation between if you present your actual maybe inheritance tax question more nicely, columns laid out with workings, you are going to get more marks as a result of that. What we need to then develop into this is, well, we've got to have a requirement and question analysis. Then this is where it's linked into your bullet point plan strategy. So what I'm referring to here, so I'm imagining if I'm in your shoes right now, that I've got a past paper question to go through, I've got my 3 requirements, and what it's saying here is I'm going to analyse the requirement first of all. I'm then going to go through the question, so trying to pick out sort of what the company is, what they do, what's the issue. And the key thing here is that the external examiner mentions it, there are articles on this online, that students who plan their answer beforehand do better as a result. Now, I'm not advocating for you to go spend 10-15 minutes. This is why I call it the sort of bullet point plan strategy, where you use keywords and key areas that you've identified as you're going through the question and the requirement, so that you see the keyword, it's a trigger to you, I've got to make a sort of topic on that, and then I'm going to write about it in my sort of detailed manner, being specific to the question. And if it's a 4-mark question, 4 little trigger bullet points, you've got so much more of an actual possibility of getting higher marks on there. The reason for this is, in this examination, loads of students will quickly read the requirement and knowledge dump as a result. So don't fall into the trap of doing this. So just as an example on here, so maybe the question was asking us about the reasons for a closed company status. Okay, I've just picked out one from a past paper that you can go have a look at online, and I'd be sort of writing in my little bullet points on there, sort of maybe controlled by shareholders, also directors, maybe something on those lines, little bullet point at the start. And then it relates to, this is where you've got to be so specific, maybe 5 largest, next bullet point, then control, got to talk about it. This is where I'm going to relate it back to the scenario. And then I think, well, if you've got control, more than 50%, question mark, these are the sort of notes that I'd be going through. Associate holding, relatives, so are they in the same maybe sort of family, so that they have associate holdings involved. And then next thing, applying to the scenario, so relating it further down. So do the directors and the shareholders within this example for closed company status actually have control on them? And then if you have any other points to mind, so just jotting those little points down tends to be a sort of little 4 or 5 marker, but that approach there, we've considered various different areas. Take it, apply it to whatever question it may be. Income tax, capital gains tax, get those little bullet points up at the top, and then below start to actually plan out your then start to actually apply those bullet points as your little triggers to say, okay, this is my first point, and this is the next key exam technique, especially for advanced taxation, how you then take those trigger bullet points and apply it into your answer now. And this is where you are telling the marker to mark this bit. Okay, so this is the technique you need to do. Take those bullet points, or take the first one, and then you go down and say 2, maximum 3 sentences to gain that mark. Jot it down, 2-3 sentences, then leave a gap, leave a space, and then go on to the next point. So in other words, when the marker comes to look at your script, they'll see that little paragraph, 2, maximum 3 sentences. They've got to read it and they go, is there a mark here? Okay, next space, next paragraph, is there a mark here? This is different because the external examiner comments on students who just write one full page and they have to sort of fish out in there to try and find the marks. Whereas your technique now that you're going to apply with the different paragraphs as you go through, so if it's a 4 marker, you're going to have 4 little paragraphs, 2 sentences, maximum 3, you've got to be really clear and concise, and that's where you're going to pick up and you're going to get so more marks. That is a really underrated technique in my eyes on there. You need to actually state the rules that you are following and then, as we relate it back to that example, apply it to the scenario. So you know the rules, you know the standards, you know the rates, but then what is going on in that scenario? We're going to come on to more exam tips on this later on, so make sure you're hanging around to the end. I'm sure you're scribbling away as we go through, but these notes, I've got a lot of knowledge to pass on. So next key thing is when you're doing those little paragraphs, to get that 1 mark, 1 paragraph, 1 mark on the next one, 2, maximum 3 sentences, these are the key things you've got to be thinking of as you're writing. Am I being clear and am I being concise? So being straight to the point, showing all workings, and actually presenting it nicely for the marker as if it was for a client. The external examiner always relates it to, well, what if this was actually a piece of work you're doing for a client? Is it up to standard? So being clear and concise, to the point, showing all the workings, as we said, that is going to benefit you vastly, and you're going to be in that 35% that are going to pass this examination. What we've also got to get down, which is even, I probably should have put it earlier on in that video, but I've got so many ideas that are going to help you out, and I'm sure you're giggling away now. But question number 1, this is another fundamental area that there are 4 professional marks in question number 1. And I always find that students actually go, oh, I'm not quite sure what they actually relate to. Don't worry, I got you. I've done the donkey work for you, and I'll even put it up here for you. Number 1, problem solving. So that's showing all your workings as you're going through. Number 2, we've got the actual clarity of explanations and calculations. So we've gone through that tactic, how to lay it out in the paragraphs. Number 3, we've got the effectiveness of your communication. So relating it back to the scenario, being clear and concise, you're going to pick up on that mark. And then number 4, presentation and style. So actually applying pro formas, understanding how the question will flow. And those are 4 marks that you need to get in the bag, because if you get those 4 in the bag, well, only another 46 to find, isn't it? That should be your mindset as you're going through that. But learn the actual Q1 or question 1 formats. So get this jotted down. The common ones that are always tested are on briefing notes, reports, memorandums, and maybe a letter. It's been tested in the past, but you've got to know the layout so that when you see either of those keywords for question 1, you're going to hit the ground running. You're going to say, James, I know how to lay it out. And usually it goes on the basis of, and if you want to jot this down, client, then the purpose, who's it prepared by, then the date. And then after that, you'll see it. Go have a look at a past paper question. Actually use your little layout. Who's the client? Write down their name. What's the purpose of the report? Maybe it's a capital gains calculation. Who's it prepared by? So what is your position? Maybe the financial accountant. And the date which you're actually preparing those briefing notes for. Then you write underneath, well, this bit relates to part A. Leave a gap. This bit relates to part B. And so on to C, whatever it may be. And if you apply that, that is 4 marks in the bag, following it all the way through. And trust me, that is going to help you vastly on there. So that is tip number 3 for my advanced taxation exam strategy. So many good points in there I wish I'd have known before doing it for the first time. But coming on to tip number 4 now, and this is the advanced taxation or P6 key pro formas and computations. Paramount now, okay? As we've just talked about in the professional marks, you're given 1 professional mark for presentation and style. And well, what does that refer to? Well, there are different tactics and different ways of going about it, but I'd recommend either doing these on Excel, or I can even relate back to my technical piece of paper on here, where basically as you go through, you write down every single potential option that could come up in a inheritance tax question, capital gains tax question. But there are sort of usual sort of questions that more regularly come up in particular sections. So just get this jotted down that for section A, usually you have more corporate and group questions in there, so focusing on gains and losses carrying forward. So be careful on updates in the actual syllabus on there. There is also sort of overseas and consortium or consortia questions. Inheritance tax again is another favourite for section A, along with finally, and not to be understated, capital gains tax to be aware of. Section B, what I see from my experience going through, having a look at the external examiner's report, they do like personal, business and investment finance on there, so being careful and understanding what the client's position is. Sort of multiple tax issues, so definitely overseas in this case, and that's relating to where they're resident and where they're domiciled. They've also started to include more family company issues, which is an interesting sort of topic with, I see that as more areas that could be applied to real life, which is quite good of them actually, quite enjoying that. And then finally on there, unincorporated businesses. So they have sort of groups and corporate in section A, and then if they don't go for that in section A, then they maybe will go for unincorporated businesses in section B, just to be aware of. But when I'm referring to actual pro formas in Excel or on a piece of paper, whatever it may be, all I want you to get down there is, well, from top to bottom, what has come up in every single question that I've been through. And then that's where you can start to have a little spreadsheet for each particular pro forma or computation, whether that's income tax or an example on here maybe for inheritance tax. So at the start on your Excel spreadsheet, you're going to have all the values that you've possibly seen, so what they've actually included in scenarios. Then you've got all your sort of exemptions on there, potential exempt transfers. Then you've got your nil rate bands, so what potential differentiating questions have we had there? Chargeable transfers, that'll be the next thing as you sort of go down. Any charitable amounts that's going to affect the percentage that's going to be due, the rates payable, and the due date at the bottom. So before you know it, you can start to chop and change and add these in and annotate them so that if you've got an inheritance tax question and you analyse the question effectively, you're going to think about that pro forma, whether that's written down or on Excel, or do both, because you'll learn it better. That is a really effective way so that you can actually take that pro forma and apply it in your exam. That is going to settle your nerves down so much more, because you're going to become more familiar with the columns and the workings, where to place the items. I almost found that when I first did the advanced taxation examination, there was just so much to digest, and then trying to take that knowledge out of my mind to then apply it onto pen and paper or computer-based examination, whatever it may be that you're having to do. That is one of the key fundamental areas why students fail. So by having these little tools, the mistake sheets, the pro formas, going through the core text, the right resources, that is definitely going to help you out 100%. Give it a try, let me know how you get on. That was one of the deciding factors that got me from that fail up to a pass. So that is tip number 4, pro formas and computations. Now, finally, tip number 5, and this is where I just couldn't live with myself without telling you this. Tip number 5, James's Advanced Taxation Exam Top Tips. Pen and paper at the ready, make sure you've got some energy, stick with me through on this, because I thought, what am I going to tell my subscribers or anyone new who's watching this video for the first time? What are the fundamental things from all of my research, all of my knowledge of being a tutor? Well, first of all, if you haven't already, you've got to go away and read, or go and have a look at the most up-to-date external examiner's report. I'll put a link to it up at the top here. And as well, there is also going to be the technical articles. So you've got that little sort of screenshot up here, but I'll put the link for you in the description. Go click it, it's going to take you over there. It's going to improve your knowledge and see what are the topical areas that you need to be aware of. I didn't read any before I failed. When I read them afterwards, I picked up on so many more areas and it proved beneficial, as you know. Then we're going to say to ourselves, well, where else did I go wrong on this? Well, first of all, I've got to say, you've got to answer what the requirement is asking for and not what you know. Or in other words, don't knowledge dump on the paper. This is one of the traps I fell into, that maybe I saw a trigger word of capital gains or inheritance, or when's it due, or liability, or something on those lines. I just thought, right, I know about liabilities and I know about inheritance tax. I'm just going to write it down. Well, in actual fact, this is why past papers are so key, that you go through it, be as critical as you can. And I remember marking on it, I've written a full A4 page, but I wouldn't actually give myself any marks on it, which you have to be brutally honest with yourself. Give it a go, just sit down, work through those past papers, and actually mark it to say, have I really answered what the question is asking for? Then, the next area where is so fundamental, where students failed in this exam, and I really picked up on this the second attempt when I got the 64, was in the requirement for the advanced taxation exam, they phrase it like calculate and explain, or define and computate. So you've actually got to answer both of them on there. So you can actually, I got into the habit of putting a little 1 and a little 2. So if it said calculate and explain, a little 1 over calculate, a little 2 over explain, as a reminder to say, well, when I'm going through my answer, have I calculated it, and then have I explained it enough? And sometimes they even give you a little breakdown for it. So make sure you've got that jotted down in your revision notes for your past paper practice. So to say, when I go through this requirement, am I really understanding what it is asking me for? And once you get into the detail of it, that's where you get so much better at analysing the question, and then you just focus in on what you actually need. We've got to also have a look at common areas where I used to struggle on, and I know students also do, because they're really topical areas. And it links into the actual mistake sheet above, because the first one, and the external examiner loves this, it's domicile. And this comes under inheritance tax, capital gains tax, and then you've got to be thinking, well, branching off from that to get in your notes now, where are they deemed to be domiciled? We've also got to be aware of where sort of residency and domicile, so the remittance basis versus the arising basis, understanding the difference between the two, and the actual status of the person. So if I was you, I'd go through, find examples of all of those different topic areas, practice and practice and practice through, but it all comes down to understanding and trying to picture, imagine this was actually one of your clients, or if a client picked up the phone and said, James, I'm here for X amount of days, or this is my situation. That's what you've got to get better at focusing on. The next one I've got jotted down here are the definitions and implications of losses carried forward. And this links into the sort of gains of the groups and the consortia and VAT groups as well. Classic Section A, you've got to get better in Section A with groups. The external examiner loves to test it. There are always new different rules. So again, relating back to that study guide, make sure you're up to date on any little changes that have been chopping and changing around on there. But the definitions and the implications between the different types of group, that's another fundamental area. Thirdly, I had to get it down, but reliefs. So again, relating to inheritance tax, capital gains tax, and this is where the pro formas and the computations on Excel, or rock and roll, pen and paper, whatever works best for you. But the key things to get jotted down here are the conditions and what actually qualifies for the person's actual tax position. So again, it's all about applying to the scenario what you would do if they were an actual client, and state the principles that you're applying. So state the principles, apply it to the actual scenario, and then explain what is actually going on as a result from it. This is another thing which it makes me laugh when I look back at it. And I go, I really wish I'd have known that at the start, because it would have just settled my nerves and just sort of settled any anxiety. Because when you've been and you failed this exam, and then you go back to tuition, and then you go back to everything, get this jotted down, but be prepared for something to come up that you have no idea of. Okay, just jot that down so that psychologically in your mind you go, there's going to be something on the exam that I'm not going to know anything about. Trust me, the actual syllabus is so wide, the external examiner doesn't actually expect you to know absolutely everything in it. So, for example, I've got down here substantial shareholder exemption, which is actually quite a topical area. It's been tested recently, so get that jotted down. But don't be flummoxed by any sort of dodgy little questions on sort of rules or dates or payments or exemptions, whatever it may be. If you get the question, or if you have a little bit on it and you go, look, just relax, let's work through the process. And the main thing here is if you don't know anything about it, try and work it out from the scenario, apply your logic, apply your knowledge on there, and just put something down. And this is the question you've got to ask yourself: is it reasonable what I've put down? And maybe leave it to the last bit, because if you don't know it, then give it a few minutes at the end of the exam. But just ask yourself, am what I'm writing reasonable? Can I fish for a mark or two here and maybe pick up a mark on something that I've never really come across? So just relax, go through the process, apply it back to the scenario, and you're going to have a much better chance of going through it. And this nicely relates into the point on here that don't forget about ethics. If in doubt and you didn't know anything about it, does it relate to ethics? Does it have, and make sure you've got these jotted down, could you relate it to objectivity, integrity, confidentiality, professional behaviour, or professional competence and due care? Always comes up, little topical bits that tax evasion, tax avoidance usually get thrown in there, linked into a variety of topics. And like I said, ethics could come up, or you could actually link it in maybe to a topic area that you had no idea about. And if you link it in, if the external examiner goes, well, it's not on the mark scheme, but it looks pretty reasonable to me, and it applies to the scenario, that little 1 mark could be the difference between a 49 and a 50 on top of that. So make sure you get that jotted down, not to overlook that. Next thing we've got to, and don't underestimate the importance of question practice and exam technique. This is so fundamental, and I know with advanced taxation you think, oh well, but they're in the different rates and they go back a few different years. Do all the past papers that you have with the actual rates and rules that apply to yours, and then go back to see, well, what did they test in those previous sittings? Yes, they're going to have different numbers on there, but the actual principles and the style of the requirements are all going to be the same. The more question practice you do, the more exam papers you do, the better the chance you've got. And with the other tips that we've gone through on here, you're going to have a much better chance of passing this exam. This is where it links into that you can't just learn the textbook. When I was at college and speaking with students online, loads of people say, oh, have you read all the textbook and the rules and the facts? Well, yes, but that was one of the things that you've got to apply it back to the scenario. If you don't apply it back to the scenario, you're going to be in the 65% that fail this exam. You've got to get into the habit, and this is another really good tip to get down now, of actually sort of writing it down from the actual company or person's name. So this is the application technique that you've got to get into the mindset of writing, say, James Limited of the group, or the client of Mr. Wright, as an example on here. Rather than writing, and this is one of the reasons why I failed it at the start, rather than writing it or they, if you actually relate it to, well, James Limited or the client of Mr. Wright, and apply it to that individual, your brain starts to get into the habit of saying, well, yes, I actually know what we're on about here. I know how to apply it to the actual individual or the company. So that is really good technique, so underrated, and you're just being a bit more specific, which the external examiner is really going to want to see. Now, finally on here, we've got to talk about the computer-based examination format and the software. So depending if you're doing it face-to-face at a desk or you're doing it online, if you're doing the computer-based examination, you've got to get prepared and actually understand the functions of the software. The layout, you can copy and paste things that really help in terms of headings, so practice on them. You can buy a couple on ACCA's website. If you are going to, make sure you do this after you've already done a few sort of pen and paper examples and you've been through the core text, because it will highlight on there for you what areas of knowledge that you are lacking. So there's no point in doing one right at the start when you've not really gone through the core text much, because then you're just throwing away your money on it. So make sure you go through it after you've gone through the majority of the core text, you've already done a few past paper questions, and you're getting a bit more familiar with the software. The better quality answers come from working on how you best plan the answer before and then writing it. You will get quicker with practice. So that links into that bullet point strategy, pinpointing those areas, and then it links into the requirement, understanding who the actual client is, referring to their direct name, as we talked about, And just getting all these into your system, into your question practice is going to help you vastly. And relax. That is tip number 5 for you. Oh, and if you've made it to the end of this video, I hope that has definitely helped you. Hand's probably a bit achy on that, I'd say, as a result. But those are my 5 top tip areas. If I was in your shoes and you've got to do the advanced taxation examination, whether you're watching that video and you've got the exam tomorrow or next week or in a few months, there are tips in this video that are going to help you. So if you've got any friends who are also doing this examination, send this video over to them. And as ever, if you have liked this video and you found the content helpful, feel free to give it a massive like as well, so that more students can actually view and watch the content. It's all from my experience, and it's just to help you out. So if you've got any other questions or queries, feel free to leave me a comment below of if you want more advanced taxation videos or any other videos from an ACCA exam that you'd like me to do. If it has helped, or if you've watched this video and then passed the exam, let me know in the comments below, because it's always lovely to read on top of that. Well, finally, the sort of last thing I can say is, well, best of luck with your upcoming exam. You've got all the notes, you've got all the tools, you've got your official notes on there. What I can do is I can link up at the top and on the side here other videos to other study tips on my actual channel that I'd highly recommend for you to go watch them now. They are going to help with you going through that exam technique. But as always, on that bombshell, I'll see you next time. Cheers!